The city of Khartsyzk, a strike on an ammunition depot, we see, detonates beautifully, phenomenally. Today, July 3rd, Thursday, we have a traditional military briefing with military expert Roman Svitan. I will ask our viewers to subscribe to YouTube 24, subscribe in the description to my YouTube channel. Roman, I will ask our viewers to be active. Let them ask you in the comments what they are interested in, their reactions, their thoughts. Strike on Khartsyzk, 30 kilometers from Donetsk, as far as I understand. They say that there was an ammunition depot there. As for the air defense of the Russian air defense system, MLRS, I apologize, and barrel artillery.
Khartsyzk put me on my feet after my discharge from the army. And he quit because of problems with the spine, protrusions, hernias, schmorals. There were many things, all sorts of troubles. 1,800 hours of flight time, and there were serious problems with the spine. For more than a dozen years, I went to Khartsyzk almost every day, to the pool. There is a good pool, a smart masser, and they solved my problem. They solved my problem with both protrusions and hernias. After that, I was able to walk, more or less. Hometown of Khartsyzk. Good memories of him. And the Russians are now using it as a military hub. It is located in the depths. The rear now, at the moment, is already under 100 kilometers, if you count from Pokrovsk, a little less. And there are a lot of enterprises, industrial facilities of the mining and metallurgical complex, which at one time served metallurgy and coal mining in the Donbass. And it is these enterprises that are now used by the Russians as the main means of supporting the front, as well as warehouses, that is, warehouses. And, most likely, it was these warehouses that were struck by our partisans, who have remained there since the year 2014. They guided and completed the combat mission. And then a rocket came in, and, good evening, we are from Ukraine. That's about how they worked. Well done, handsome. That is, now the Russians, on the eve of the second wave of the summer military campaign, which is likely to begin closer to September, are gathering reserves, deploying bases now, reinforcing them in the hope of capturing the entire Donbass, the entire Zaporizhia region, at least from this direction. And, of course, the main task for us is to find out exactly where these bases and warehouses are located, and then cover them. We currently have enough means of destruction.
Roman, a large number of drones were also attacked all night. The Leipetsk region, the city of Yelets, there is a joint stock company, Energia, which produces perhaps the largest number of batteries that Russia needs, including for their UAVs. In addition, they say, explosions rang out, and there is a military airfield Leipetsk 2. In total, local publics counted 20 arrivals.
This is the correct, competent approach. Again, how many times has this been said? You break through the Russian frontal defense at one point, in one direction, and then you figure out how to bypass the object. Because objects at distances of hundreds of kilometers are already much weaker than Moscow or the same frontal ones. The exit is correct, competent, to one point, that is, to one location, in Leipetsk. Next is the destruction of two objects or, at least, damage to two objects at least. This battery plant has been repeatedly attacked by us, but it still needs to be finished, because they have a certain time to recover, and it must be kept under constant control. Of course, the Leipetsk airfield, which the Russians use as a base for tactical and army aviation.
Roman, the news that will also be for you, especially, it seems to me, is pleasant, because we have repeatedly mentioned the 155th Brigade, which was destroyed near Vuhledar. This elite brigade was Russia. It also worked in Kursk, where they also got it from our defenders. What is known, as of yesterday, July 2nd, that the former commander of the 155th Brigade was liquidated, or part-time. I did not understand, but he is also the deputy head of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation. His name is Mikhail Gudkov. It was eliminated during a strike in the Kursk region, where there is a national checkpoint of Kornivo. Kornivo, Rilska, Leave. These are the areas where our defenders are actively working.
Glushkov, Tyakin, yes, that's right, that's where they keep it, held the defense, at least, the paratroopers, the Crimean, the 155th, this is the 810th, the Crimean, the 155th, the brigade from Vladivostok. This is exactly from there, with Trepangs that are rushing through our Donbass, and in Kursk as well, and the landing force from Ivanov. 3 main, at least, airborne brigades, which are now in the Kursk direction, are trying to restrain our offensive actions. In the Tyakin district, it is just near Glushkov, as well as the area of the city of Sudza, that is, the Sudza direction. Most likely, he was hit. Recently, we have repeatedly mentioned that strikes are carried out mainly by HIMARS systems or GBU aviation ammunition. That is, either our rocket launchers work with HIMARS, the M31, M30 missile, which have proven themselves well, the range is 86 kilometers. Either GBU 39 or HIMARS are working in this direction. That is, it was hit by one of these long-range strikes. In principle, 70 kilometers is enough to reach almost all the main rear settlements of Russia in this direction.
Roman, also interesting information from Moscow. Yesterday we saw a car. This is the MASH Telegram channel transmitting them. The car of the former, but there are probably no former, KGB officer, 80-year-old, detonated. His daughter, also an FSB officer, managed to pull him out, they say. There were several detonations. The center of Moscow, you know, under normal civilian conditions, might not have given it importance. But firstly, a full-scale invasion. Secondly, representatives of the Russian law enforcement agencies. And thirdly, our special forces have already eliminated bumps in Moscow. Even remember this Kirillov, the head of the chemical troops, when he accidentally passed by an unwanted scooter.
The information came from Russian public sources. The Russians themselves claimed that the commander of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation had been eliminated. So we rejoiced, for at least half a day, and then the Russians clarified that it was actually employees of the Committee for State Security. However, in terms of significance, they did not fall far from our primary desired target. If it was not the commander this time, then it will be another time. This time it was the KGB officers. Our people are working, the system is functioning. This is most likely a targeted elimination, where sources on the ground are active, assuming our system was indeed engaged. The struggle between the Kremlin towers has intensified, with internal pressure mounting and threatening to disrupt governance within the Russian Federation. And when this manifests through actions of such a nature, it indicates the seriousness of the situation and the depth of the confrontation. Therefore, it is not so important whether it was our agents or internal infighting. What matters is that there are now several fewer KGB officers. At least for now, this is the information available. It is currently being provided by the Russians themselves. We are still awaiting confirmation from our general staff. But right now, we are discussing both the reported elimination of the commander of the Black Sea Fleet and the deaths of these KGB officers along with their families, all according to Russian sources. This may also be a psychological special operation that must be clearly understood. They could be deliberately spreading disinformation to distract attention or to cover up deeper underlying issues. Within a day or two, I believe our main intelligence directorate will sort things out. They have their own people on the inside. And perhaps, even those who press the button.
Roman, let us now turn our attention to what is happening across the ocean in the United States. Politico describes the situation as the left hand not knowing what the right is doing. Weapon deliveries promised to Ukraine have partially stalled due to political delays. There is an overwhelming amount of news. I remembered, we once discussed the British government's announcement to provide Ukraine with 350 missiles and 10 launch systems. Roman, they appear to be Raven launchers, if I am stating that correctly, and those systems are being delivered along with missiles. Incidentally, Fedorov, who heads the digital sector, said yesterday that this might mark a breakthrough in drone interception. Could this be considered an extension of that breakthrough? How effectively can these weapons tackle the daily Russian drone attacks, which come by the dozens or hundreds?
For several months now, we have been proposing, live on air, that our leadership launch mass production, even using those same diesel vehicles. You may recall we said, even if it's on diesels, let it be on diesels eventually. We are talking about the supply and launch systems for R-73 missiles, an old Soviet missile that was once manufactured in Ukraine. Tens of thousands of these missiles were produced. It is 50 years old, or at least more than 40, that is certain. I remember graduating from the flight academy, and we were already working with the R-73 back then. That means it's definitely over 40 years old. In fact, this year marks 40 years since I graduated, and this missile was already in service then. It's a short-range missile with a heat-seeking warhead, the R-73. It was used by our intelligence units, first mounted on the Magura platform and tested in action, destroying several Russian aerial vehicles, helicopters among them, just a few months ago. So now, if you mount that very same launch system with targeting capability onto a Gazelle, it becomes an excellent addition to a mobile response unit. It's essentially a base model for a mobile air defense group that can intercept Garand drones or cruise missiles. It flies at several Machs, meaning it can basically catch up to anything. It can intercept a cruise missile, a jet-powered Garand, even at high altitudes. Those drones fly at altitudes of up to 10 kilometers, and this system can reach and neutralize them with ease. We've been offering this solution for a long time. A stationary version already exists, for instance, the Raven system. Essentially, the same concept, a simple vehicle like the Gazelle equipped with launchers for similar missiles. Only in this case, it's the British Osram, same family as the American AIM-9 or AMRAAM. Technically, they all belong to the same class as our R-73 and AIM-9. By the way, again, what did Magura do? Interestingly, Magura replaced the R-73 with the AIM-9 and destroyed two Su-30 aircraft near Novorossiysk. That was also reported recently. So this is all part of the same trend. At the core of these vehicles, the main strike element is the missile. And these missiles have been produced in the thousands, even tens of thousands. They are equipped with heat-seeking heads. Essentially, it's a simple thermal targeting mechanism. Of course, there are other specialized systems involved, but the general concept remains. The missile just needs to be guided. The targeting system doesn't even need to be radar-based. It can be thermal, video, audio, whatever works, as long as the warhead locks onto the heat signature. So, the British have already moved ahead with the stationary deployment principle. What did they do? Not with this particular missile. It's an air-to-air type, a fighter missile, roughly speaking, used by fighter jets. The military is working. Our Magura platform installed it on a UAV, while the British mounted it onto a kind of Gazelle vehicle, slightly larger in size, and completed the task. In essence, it was the use of fighter-grade missiles launched from the ground. They found a mid-range guidance system. A crew of 3 operates it. The same kind of mobile group, only, instead of machine guns, they have a missile. The missile is light, up to 100 kilograms. The warhead varies, from 8 to 10 kilograms. In principle, it can destroy a cruise missile, an aircraft, or a drone, swiftly and effectively. Let me emphasize once again, there are many of these missiles. They are not cheap, and such mobile units are exactly what we need. Today, for example, we've received a dozen of these Raven systems. But what is truly needed are hundreds. Hundreds of these Gazelle-type vehicles, roughly speaking, equipped with missile launchers, and we could solve the problem for good. Close off aerodynamic targets. Secure our airspace. Especially if these mobile groups are deployed along the line of combat contact, reaching approximately 50 kilometers in depth. This is what we consistently talk about, the core level, the level of territorial defense. In that case, not a single Shahid or Garand drone, nor a cruise missile, would enter Ukrainian territory through the front. They simply would not get through. These groups could be positioned quickly. The process is straightforward and rapid. The British did all of this in just a few months. What we now see was created a few months ago. These Ravens are delivering them to us, and they were assembled within months. A missile was mounted on a mobile launcher. That's your mobile group. Properly designed and efficiently structured. It can be reinforced with the same machine gun, if necessary, for example, or with some other mechanisms. There are systems capable of intercepting not just 100 or 500, but even up to 1,500 Russian Garand drones in a single engagement. In that case, launching them is pointless. They face a 10 to 15 kilometers thick barrier they can't penetrate. We would be left with only one remaining threat if we implement this strategy as proposed. Right now, the British are assisting us. The one remaining threat would be Russian ballistic missiles. Against Russian ballistic missiles, our most effective air defense is the RAM, our own ballistic system targeting Moscow. That is the best air defense. As soon as the first few dozen RAMs strike the Kremlin, not a single ballistic missile will be launched at our territory again.
Roman, we must speak about the U.S. I will try to explain briefly, and I would like to ask you to analyze it. The Pentagon confirmed it has reduced aid to Ukraine, help already at the Poland border and nearly in our hands. Jake Sullivan adds the Pentagon is reviewing reserves to prioritize U.S. readiness for any scenario. However, Sullivan insists this is entirely false. He explains that the weapons in question were allocated under the USAI program, which means that the United States approved funding for these munitions last year, ordered them from American manufacturers, and therefore they are newly produced and not sourced from existing stockpiles. As such, they should not be subject to reserve review procedures. And, Roman, the most interesting detail comes from Politico. According to their reporting, the Pentagon's decision to reduce or redirect part of this assistance was not known to the White House, nor to members of Congress. What is your overall take on this situation?
I believe this is nothing more than American verbal diarrhea. And it's happening all at once. Everyone over there is experiencing a simultaneous rhetorical purge. Yet the real facts are painfully obvious, and we've been discussing them for several months already. Donald Trump traded Ukraine for the issue of the Middle East. Vladimir Putin committed to not aiding Iran and fulfilled that commitment. And as part of this arrangement, Trump pledged not to support Ukraine. Now, Putin is demanding that Trump fulfill his part of the conspiracy. Trump enjoys making deals. And this particular deal is now glaringly evident. It's right out in the open. Trump doesn't even try to hide it anymore. They attempt to cover it up with rhetorical smokescreens, claiming they are reviewing what's left, or that they need to support Israel in the Middle East, and so on, and so forth. But this is verbal camouflage. Because the core reason is that Trump made a commitment not to supply us with weapons. If that commitment applies only to direct deliveries, then perhaps we are still fortunate. That would mean Trump is halting direct transfers only. Maybe our European partners can find a way to reroute or repurchase those supplies through alternative channels. Though that, too, is unlikely to be allowed under any arrangement with Putin. And if the deal calls for a full halt to military supplies, then Trump may well be acting as Putin's asset, Trump too. That's roughly what this looks like. Understandably, the White House and broader American establishment have erupted in a flurry of empty rhetoric because they don't know how to present something so obvious in a way that hides the truth. They don't want it to be clear that the United States has traded its European problem for a Middle Eastern one. That Iran and Palestine have been exchanged for Ukraine. And this entire maneuver is sewn with threads too white to ignore. It's glowing with transparency. There's no point in dissecting or debating this flood of words. It will continue for a while yet. What we are dealing with in reality is this: military supplies have been cut off. Donald Trump halted those deliveries, just as he promised Putin. Most critically, he halted the supply of defensive armaments. Nearly every weapon Trump has frozen, Patriot PAC-3 missiles, AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, FIM-92 Stinger missiles, are designed for air defense. In effect, Trump has opened the umbrella for Putin. He has invited Russia to strike our peaceful cities. In fact, he can be considered a co-conspirator in the terrorist and genocidal attacks currently being carried out by the Russian Federation under Putin's leadership, with the clear goal of destroying Ukraine's sovereignty. The same is true on other fronts. Trump is an accomplice in genocidal and terrorist actions against the Palestinian people and against Iran, alongside Benjamin Netanyahu. Both Netanyahu and Putin have already been issued warrants by the International Criminal Court for war crimes. Both Netanyahu and Putin have already had arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court, specifically for war crimes. The third warrant will likely be issued against Donald Trump, though probably only after he is no longer in office.
There are two questions that arise here. First, we know that Ukraine has bipartisan and bicameral support in the United States. We also know that the American people continue to support Ukraine. In your view, how might such decisions affect Donald Trump's overall political standing? Second, Western media report that Europe, shocked by Trump's decision, is exploring alternatives, like European countries buying U.S. weapons directly to supply Ukraine. Do you believe such an option is feasible?
To be honest, this would be the best-case scenario for us. The one positive aspect of Donald Trump's approach is that Europe has begun to worry about its own security. And, of course, includes Ukraine as part of that security equation. This scenario would be optimal for us. Why? Because in such a case, Americans would no longer dictate where we may or may not strike. Look here, wrap fish over there, aim here, avoid targeting this area. That's exactly what Joe Biden, the sluggish figure before Trump, was doing. The American stance under Biden was, strike here, don't strike there, coordinate every target before launching. With that kind of framework, it's impossible to win a war. Biden's mechanism would have led us to fight for several decades until the last Ukrainian. Trump's approach is harsher, but it gives us a better chance to defeat Russia more quickly because certain European mechanisms can be activated without such restrictions. Europe clearly understands that unless Russia is dismantled and its military neutralized, the threat to Europe will remain unresolved. NATO structures and the European Union would be next. In that sense, as the saying goes, every misfortune has a silver lining. Trump may be that misfortune, but there's also a benefit within it that can be unlocked. Right now, this is our best option. Yes, the American public and political establishment are shocked by Trump's actions, especially among those who actually know where Ukraine is. Because part of the U.S. population has no idea where it's located.
And Trump doesn't know. Roman, what do you think?
And Trump himself likely doesn't know either. It all depends on perception. Those who truly empathize with our suffering will, of course, create a wave of pressure. But for most Americans, they are indifferent to what happens and how. Even if those who care are numerous, their pressure on Trump won't suddenly cause him to shower us with weapons. He has made commitments, and no one acts without a reason. That's already evident in Putin's actions toward Iran. It's now clear that Trump is fully committed to supporting this deal. He won't allow direct arms supplies to Ukraine. Our main concern now is that Trump's circle, many of whom hold Israeli passports, may try to push us toward full capitulation, the kind Putin demanded and Trump likely promised him. Why? Because Putin deliberately avoids criticizing Israel for its seizure of Palestinian territories, something that was previously a major point of contention. Clearly, a deal has been made. Putin refrains from addressing Israel's aggression. Israel continues its occupation of Palestinian land, carrying out what amounts to genocide of the Palestinian people through terrorist acts. And Trump is blocking Ukraine from defending itself against similar actions from Russia. If we look at the current reality, Russia and Israel are simultaneously committing acts of genocide in Ukraine and in Palestine. And Trump is helping both. He assists the Russians, he assists the Israelis. That much is obvious now. This is the lens through which we must analyze the situation. There's no point in trying to negotiate with Trump on this issue. The International Criminal Court awaits him. There's absolutely no use in chasing after him. None whatsoever. Within this context, there are distinct relationships between Europe and the United States. There are close ties between the United Kingdom and the U.S. Somewhat strained ones between France and the U.S. and pragmatic relations between Germany and the U.S. It is this relationship that will now be activated. These ties are about to be activated. For us, that is the optimal route forward. We won't be looking over our shoulder at this foreign figure who is dealing not with European problems, nor with our problems, but with those of Israel and the broader Middle East. Let him handle those. Just not in conjunction with Ukraine. Do not trade away Ukraine. At this point, it would be better for us if Trump simply forgot about us entirely. If he shut down last year's USAID programs, we know exactly where he stands. Card Trump too. That is who he is now, working directly on behalf of Benjamin Netanyahu, focused on the Middle East, in alliance with Russia.
Roman, I read a news report yesterday and was really looking forward to discussing it with you, to have you explain it to me and to our viewers. Yesterday, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said he doesn't rule out supplying Taurus missiles to Ukraine, leaving the decision to the government. The coalition with the Christian Social and Christian Democratic Unions complicates matters, as both oppose the transfer. Most intriguing is Friedrich Merz's remark that Taurus missiles are complex and Ukrainian forces would need at least 6 months to operate them. As far as I understand, they are analogous to the Scalp and Storm Shadow missiles. This Taurus system simply has a longer range, 500 kilometers. So, do Ukrainian troops really need 6 months to master them, or would half a month suffice?
6 months.
6 months.
German specialists will likely need 6 months, but our experts, with some improvisation, can have the Taurus missile ready in 2 days. That's no exaggeration, it comes from practical experience. We have outstanding professionals, especially those who have already worked with Storm Shadow and Scalp systems. I do believe the 6 months being mentioned is indeed a necessary time frame. There's a formal 6-month training program to operate these missiles, even from scratch. That is, to ensure full proficiency in handling the weapon. A missile is a complex system, essentially no different than a drone or even an aircraft. Consider what's inside the missile itself. Aviation-grade controls, engineering systems, aircraft-level positioning, guidance, engine management, all the way to the warhead. It's an extremely sophisticated unit, virtually on par with an aircraft. Requalifying to pilot an aircraft typically takes 3 to 4 months, and mastering it requires up to 5 years. The same applies to mastering a missile system. However, given our prior experience with Scalp and Storm Shadow, I believe we can transition in just a few weeks, as soon as Taurus is transferred to us. And it will be transferred in one format or another, either directly or as a semi-assembled kit. I wouldn't rule that out. We'll work with it the same way Russia currently works with the Chinese Potselnuk. They repaint it, label it Garan 2 or Garan 3, and those Chinese missiles are already flying toward us. The same goes for Taurus. We wouldn't even bother repainting much. Just change a single letter, and we'll have our Taurus missiles. That's it, our Taurus missiles will fly toward the Russians and carry out the same mission. The question is whether they will approve such a decision. They absolutely can. Merz will not stand in the way. Why were the Christian Democratic Union and the Christian Social Union, or rather, not so much the parties themselves as Friedrich Merz, opposed to transferring these missiles to us? It was fear of responsibility. Politics has its fair share of faint-hearted figures, to use a military term. And Merz was one of them.
Scholz.
Apologies, I meant Scholz. Scholz is the cautious one, but Merz is much tougher, more resolute, and in principle, capable of making that decision. And Scholz will support it, once he realizes that full responsibility will fall on Merz. If the public is not against it, then why not? That's essentially the situation right now. I'm simply pointing out that shoals will not be an obstacle in the decision-making process. The responsibility dynamics have shifted. Behind Mers stands Rheinmetall, and we've all seen how Paprika responds to Russian threats by acting faster than our border guards.
Mers said Russia threatens that supplying Taurus missiles would drag Germany into the war. Mers said Germany has supplied many weapons already, which Ukraine now has, and Ukrainians, not Germans, will operate the Taurus missiles. Therefore, he concluded, there is no concern on their end and no reason for alarm. Roman, on the front line, our state border guards report fewer attacks in the Sumy direction. They still occur, but their intensity has notably diminished. Meanwhile, southern units report progress as well. As we've shown viewers with aerial footage, Ukrainian aviation has struck enemy drone operator sites. Reports say about half of those positions were destroyed, greatly reducing drone launches in the south.
That's exactly right. We've been discussing this for several months now. The Sumy, more precisely, the Kursk operation failed, and Russia's withdrawal from Kursk is clear. Russia launched this maneuver as a diversion before their main offensive in Donetsk and Zaporizhia. And now, everything is coming to light. It's clear that 50,000 Russian troops, including airborne units, the 155th and 810th Brigades, Ivanova paratroopers, intelligence, and special forces, are not assault units capable of operational breakthroughs. They are insufficient for that. These units are primarily used to patch up holes in defensive lines, to shore up certain directions. The airborne forces are designed for rapid deployment and swift insertion. Their equipment is suited for covering long distances quickly, when needed. That's why they plugged the Kursk gap with airborne units. Why did paratroopers appear there? Because of their fast mobility. North Korean troops were also brought in and are now positioned on the second line. But this Sumy direction could never be the primary axis, not by definition, not a priori, because there were never 150 or 200,000 Russian troops deployed there. All their core forces are concentrated in Donbass, in places like Khartsyzk, Donetsk, and Yasenovata, where strikes have been focused. These are the key warehouses, the main Russian strongholds. Of course, Mariupol, Berdyansk, Tokmak, and Palahi are also strategic points. That's why the main pressure from Russia will be concentrated on the Eastern Front, in Zaporizhia and along the Eastern Line. Why? Because their objective is to widen the land corridors and fulfill what they call their constitutional task. After all, they've written 5 Ukrainian regions into their constitution, so they will keep trampling through Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. The government must lift service exemptions for law enforcement and bring them into active duty. The armed forces should be expanded by redeploying staff from enlistment centers into core structures. Deploying even half of law enforcement personnel would help. Half can support, half join combat. This is the law enforcement we need. Without that, they're useless. No point feeding a cat that won't catch mice.
Roman, thanks for the briefing. Reminder to viewers. Today is Thursday, July 3rd. Subscribe to Channel 24's YouTube and my personal channel, link below. Like and hit the notification bell for daily updates of the military briefing with Roman Svitan. My name is Ihor Havryshchak. See you on air, only on Channel 24.